The snow fell in thick, blinding sheets, each flake landing with a soft hiss against the frozen earth. The world had become a blur of white, stretching in every direction, and the wind carried a sting sharp enough to cut through the thickest coat. Out there, on the trail leading to the ranch, a lone figure trudged forward, shoulders hunched, boots sinking into drifts that had grown taller than his knees. He was a teacher from the small town over the ridge, a man used to chalk dust and the clamor of children's voices, not the unforgiving sweep of a western blizzard. Yet he pressed on, gripping his satchel tight against his chest, knowing that somewhere, beyond the storm, warmth and shelter waited. The ranch had been quiet when he left that morning. The single father, a rugged man with sun-darkened skin and hands calloused from years of wrangling cattle, had waved him off with a polite, concerned nod. "It's a snowstorm, Ben," he said, using the teacher's first name. "Don't go wandering too far. Storms like this will bury a man before he knows it." Ben had nodded, forcing a smile, though unease had twisted in his stomach. He had promised the children he would bring them a gift before Christmas, something small, a token to brighten the long, cold holiday. The wind howled as he made his way through the rising drifts, and already the world had begun to vanish behind sheets of white. Every step grew heavier, each breath a struggle, but he pressed on, thinking of the children's expectant faces and the hope in the father's eyes. By midday, the snow had thickened, the sky a constant gray expanse, and the ranch remained just a vague shadow in the distance. Ben's legs ached, his fingers numb beneath the thin gloves he had hastily thrown on that morning. His satchel had begun to tear against the cold, the edges stiff with frost, and a worry that he might not make it gnawed at him. He paused for a moment, leaning heavily on his walking stick, and looked back over the path he had traveled. There was no sign of the road, no trace of tracks except his own, quickly buried by the relentless snowfall. Keep moving, he muttered to himself, voice swallowed by the wind. There waiting, out on the frozen plain, the wind shifted, carrying with it a sound that made him pause, a distant, rhythmic thumping, like hooves on hard-packed snow. For a moment, he thought he imagined it, but then it came again, closer, faster. His heart pounded in his chest, not from fear, but from hope. Perhaps it was the single father, checking the perimeter, coming out to fetch him before the storm trapped him completely. But when the figure emerged through the white haze, it wasn't the father. It was the shadow of a horse, and atop it, a man wrapped in heavy furs, eyes narrowed against the gale. The man didn't call out, didn't offer a hand. He simply slowed his horse and watched Ben as though assessing whether the teacher would survive another minute in the storm. Ben swallowed, gripping his satchel tighter. I'm all right," he shouted, though his voice was frail, almost lost to the wind. The rider's face softened, a faint nod acknowledging his effort. "You're lucky the snow's been light in some places. Follow me." Ben staggered forward, each step an ordeal, but the horseman strong, silent. A figure carved from the harsh land itself kept the pace slow, guiding him through drifts and frozen gullies that would have swallowed a man in an instant. Hours seemed to pass like minutes, the storm unrelenting, and yet, slowly, the ranch came into view, a cluster of wooden structures half buried in snow, smoke curling from chimneys like a promised dot. By late afternoon, Ben stumbled through the gate, breathless and near exhaustion, and the rancher met him at the doorstep. "By the Lord," he said, worry etched into every line of his face. "What in heaven were you thinking?" I had to," Ben gasped, collapsing onto the porch steps. "I promised." His words caught in his throat, shivering violently. The father didn't hesitate. He scooped him up, supporting the teacher under the arms, and guided him into the warmth of the cabin. Inside, the fire blazed in the hearth, casting long, dancing shadows across the log walls, the scent of pine smoke and roasting meat filling the space. The children, wide-eyed and bundled in thick blankets, stared at him in amazement. "You made it," the eldest whispered, voice trembling with awe. "You really came." Ben managed a weak smile, shaking his head, snow still melting from his coat. I tried," he said, voice hoarse, eyes scanning the cozy room. "I had to." The single father set him down by the fire, quickly removing the frozen outer layers of his coat and hat, revealing a face pale and wind-burned. "Sit," he commanded, ushering him into a chair and handing him a steaming mug of coffee. "Drink this. Don't speak until you can." Ben obeyed, letting the warmth seep into his frozen limbs, and for a few moments there was nothing but the sound of the fire, the occasional crack of wood, and the wind's muffled howl outside. The children crept closer, their small hands reaching toward him, faces bright with curiosity and relief. They had been told stories of the snowstorm, warned to stay inside, but nothing compared to the sight of the teacher, alive and weary, yet standing before them as if by Christmas miracle. "You made it through the storm," the father said quietly, placing a steady hand on Ben's shoulder. "Not everyone would have. Most folks would have turned back hours ago, but you kept going. That takes courage." "I didn't want to let them down," Ben whispered, his gaze moving to the children, each one wrapped tightly in blankets, their eyes shining with wonder and trust. I promised them something for Christmas. I couldn't." His words trailed off as his body relaxed slightly in the warmth, tears stinging his eyes. "I couldn't let the snow stop me." The rancher nodded, a rare softness in his gaze. "Well, you're here now, and we'll make sure you get that something." He turned to the children. "Everyone, leave him be for a minute. Let the man rest." Reluctantly, the children shuffled away, but they lingered near the edges of the room, curiosity and excitement mingling with the lingering tension of the storm. Ben sat back, eyes fixed on the fire, hands wrapped around the mug, and let the heat chase the cold from his fingers. He had been walking through a frozen wasteland only hours before, and now he was inside a haven of warmth, with the soft glow of the hearth painting comfort across the log walls. The rancher moved about the cabin, stoking the fire, bringing more wood from the stack near the door, checking the windows where the wind still pressed against the glass. He glanced at Ben, his jaw tight with concern. "You need to eat," he said, gesturing to the table where a simple meal awaited. "You've walked through a snowstorm. That takes more than just guts. It takes strength, and you've burned every ounce you've got getting here." Ben shook his head, smiling faintly. "I'm all right." "Really, you're not all right," the father countered, firm and unyielding. "But you will be." He set a plate of food before him, warm bread and a bit of ham, and pushed the mug of coffee closer. "Eat, then we'll see about that promised Christmas gift." Reluctantly, Ben began to eat, the warmth and nourishment slowly reviving him. Outside, the snowstorm began to soften, leaving the world quiet, pristine, and waiting. But inside, the cabin was alive with the warmth of hearth, the chatter of children, and the quiet watchfulness of a father who refused to let anyone suffer on his land. As he ate, Ben's gaze wandered around the cabin, taking in the simple but sturdy furnishings, the worn chairs and tables, the photographs of cattle drives, horses, and children laughing in fields. He realized then that this ranch, this family, represented something more than safety. It was hope. And somehow, in walking through the blizzard, he had found his way into that hope, into a place where even the coldest storm couldn't touch him. The father watched him with a mixture of pride and relief, the weight of the storm still fresh in his mind. "By the looks of you," he said, voice low, "you've earned more than just a hot meal. You've earned a story they'll tell for years, about a teacher who braved the snow for a promise, about a Christmas miracle, right here on this ranch." Ben's lips curled into a tired, grateful smile. I don't know if I deserve that," he said. I wanted to see them smile." "You did more than that," the rancher said. "You kept a promise. That's worth more than anything under the tree." The fire crackled, sending sparks into the air, and for a moment, the world felt still and sacred. The snowstorm, the struggle, the cold, all of it, had led to this moment. The children peeked from behind the chairs, eyes wide, and Ben finally allowed himself to rest, knowing he was safe, and that the warmth of the ranch and its family would see him through the night. Outside, the storm began to fade, leaving a blanket of snow that gleamed under the pale winter sun. Inside, the cabin glowed with laughter, warmth, and the promise of Christmas. And for the teacher who had walked through the snow, and the single father who had welcomed him, it was more than a miracle. It was a reminder that courage, kindness, and the simplest acts of devotion could turn the coldest winter into something magical. The morning after the storm dawned pale and quiet, the snow stretching in unbroken whiteness across the plains. Sunlight glinted off the drifts, reflecting in dazzling shards that made the world seem fragile, like glass waiting to crack. The ranch lay silent, except for the occasional lowing of cattle and the creak of frost-laden trees. And inside, the cabin smelled of pine, roasted meat, and the lingering warmth of a fire that had burned steadily through the night. Ben stirred first, blinking against the soft light, his body aching from the trek through the storm. He had slept on a chair by the hearth, wrapped in thick blankets, and despite exhaustion, a part of him felt lighter, freer than he had in years. The single father was already awake, moving about the cabin with quiet efficiency, checking on the children, stoking the fire, and preparing breakfast as if the storm had never touched them. His hands were steady, experienced, and somehow reassuring in a way that made the cabin feel more like home than it had the day before. "Morning," Ben said finally, his voice rough but warm, carrying over the crackle of the fire. "Morning," the father replied, glancing up and offering a small nod. "Coffee." Ben accepted gratefully, sipping the steaming liquid and letting the warmth chase the chill from his bones. He glanced at the children, still in their pajamas, wide-eyed with excitement, whispering to one another about the night's snowstorm and the mysterious teacher who had arrived despite it. There was a quiet awe in their eyes, a mixture of admiration and wonder, as though Ben's journey through the storm had transformed him into something larger than life. "They called it a miracle last night," the father said, leaning against the mantel, voice low but firm. "You walked through the storm, and now you're here. They don't forget things like that. Not easily." Ben shook his head, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I don't know about miracles," he said. I just didn't want to disappoint them." His gaze drifted to the window, watching the snow glint and shift in the wind's remnants. It felt necessary. "Sometimes necessary is what passes for a miracle," the father said quietly. He moved toward the stove, flipping a cast iron skillet with practiced hands. "Sit down, eat, then we'll see about the gifts." The breakfast was simple but hearty: eggs, ham, and freshly baked bread. Ben ate slowly, savoring each bite, noticing how every small detail, the warmth, the light, the smells felt like a triumph over the storm that had nearly claimed him. The children hovered nearby, eager but respectful, their eyes bright with curiosity and cautious hope. Each bite of bread and sip of coffee felt like a small reclaiming of the world outside the snow, a reminder that even in the harshness of winter, life could hold warmth. After breakfast, the rancher gestured toward the small barn out back. "Come with me," he said. "We've got something to show you." Ben followed, curious, boots crunching in the snow as they walked across the yard. The children ran ahead, their laughter carrying over the frozen plains, a sound so pure it made the snow seem brighter. The father opened the barn doors, revealing a row of horses, their breath steaming in the cold air, and in the center, a small pile of gifts, handmade toys, carefully wrapped bundles, and trinkets heaped together as if the barn itself held the promise of Christmas. The children gasped, rushing forward to explore the pile, their hands flying over the packages, whispering guesses about what each might contain. Ben watched, heart swelling, and for the first time, he realized that his journey through the storm had not only been a test of endurance, but also a bridge between himself and this family, a bridge built on trust, warmth, and the quiet certainty that kindness mattered. One of the children, the eldest, came to him with a small hand-carved horse. "You brought us here," she said softly. "You made it through the storm. This is for you, so we don't forget." Ben knelt, taking the small toy in his hands. The wood was smooth, polished by patient care, and the simple form of the horse carried a weight far greater than its size. "It's beautiful," he said, voice thick. "Thank you. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," the father said from behind him. "They just want you to remember that courage and effort matter, that miracles, well, sometimes they're made by people willing to walk through storms." Ben looked up, taking in the ranch, the family, and the snow-blanketed land beyond. The storm was gone, the threat dissipated, yet the sense of awe lingered, filling the cabin and the barnyard with a quiet, reverent warmth. He realized then that the true miracle wasn't just surviving the storm, it was the chance to be here, in this place, among these people, to witness their hope and resilience. The day passed in a blur of activity. Ben helped with chores, feeding the horses and mending fences, his teacher's hands learning the rough, practical labor of ranch life. The father guided him patiently, offering tips and advice, showing him the rhythm of work that had sustained his family for years. The children followed, eager to show him the ropes, giggling as they demonstrated how to coax the animals and stack firewood efficiently. When the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the snow, the cabin filled with the aroma of roasted meat and baking bread. Ben helped set the table, and for the first time, he felt a deep sense of belonging. The storm outside had forged a bond, an unspoken understanding between himself, the father, and the children. The hardships they had faced together, though Ben had endured the worst of the storm, had created a connection that no ordinary day could have achieved. As they gathered for dinner, the children sat close, faces glowing in the firelight. They chattered excitedly, recounting tales of the storm and their teacher's arrival, each story growing taller and more fantastical with every retelling. Ben listened, laughing quietly, letting himself be swept into their world, feeling a warmth he had long thought lost. The father watched him, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "You've done more than survive the storm," he said. "You've brought something back into this cabin that winter can't touch. Hope, joy, maybe even a little magic." Ben shook his head, smiling but shaken. "I didn't do anything magical. I just kept moving. And you welcomed me. That's all it takes," the father said. "A bit of heart, a bit of courage, and a willingness to be here for others. That's what makes miracles, son. That's what makes Christmas." As evening settled in, they lit candles around the cabin, and the children gathered around Ben, each placing small gifts and drawings they had made in the quiet hours. The teacher felt a lump in his throat as he realized that the journey through the storm had given him more than he could have imagined. Not just gratitude, but connection. Not just survival, but purpose. Outside, the snow reflected the candlelight, turning the world into a soft, sparkling wonderland. Inside, the cabin glowed with laughter, warmth, and the quiet reverence of a family who had survived winter's harshness and embraced the promise of hope. Ben realized that the storm had not only tested him, it had brought him to a place where miracles weren't just possibilities. They were tangible, woven into the lives of people who had opened their doors and hearts to him. Later, as the children were tucked into bed, the father and Ben sat by the dying fire, the cabin silent except for the occasional pop of wood and the wind whispering against the windows. Ben sipped a mug of coffee, hands wrapped around the warmth, and looked at the father with a newfound respect. "You called it a Christmas miracle," Ben said softly. I think you were right." The father nodded, eyes thoughtful. "Not because the storm ended, or because we survived it, but because we showed up for one another, because we chose to care. That's the miracle." Ben smiled, letting the words sink in. He had walked through the storm, braving cold and exhaustion, but it was the bond he had found here, in the warmth of the ranch and the hearts of the family, that truly felt miraculous. When he finally rose to leave, heading to a spare bed in the cabin, he glanced out at the snow-covered plains one last time. The storm was gone, leaving a world reborn in white, peaceful and pure, and for the first time in a long time, Ben felt a sense of peace within himself, a certainty that he had done something meaningful, something that mattered. As the night deepened, the father checked the fire and looked at the teacher. The children sleeping soundly in their beds, the snow outside lay undisturbed, a silent witness to courage, dedication, and the small, enduring miracles of life. Ben's journey through the blizzard had been more than an act of endurance. It had been a path to belonging, a bridge to human connection that no winter could erase. And as he drifted into sleep, he realized that he had witnessed something rarer than survival, a Christmas miracle born not of magic, but of heart, courage, and the quiet, steadfast acts of love that define a family, a home, and the spirit of the season itself. Morning would come. The plains would glimmer under the pale winter sun, and life would move forward, but the memory of this night, of this storm, and of the courage it inspired, would remain forever, etched in the hearts of all who had shared it. The single father smiled quietly, watching the embers glow, knowing that they had not just endured the storm, they had created something lasting. And somewhere in the stillness, the teacher slept peacefully, wrapped in blankets and gratitude, dreaming of snow, warmth, and a family who had shown him the true meaning of a miracle.